We thank you very much, Bundespräsident Uli Maurer. We proceed now with the introduction of our co-chairs, actually. And I would like to start with Satya Nadella, who, together with me even much more, represents the older generation here on this stage. But you represent business, and I think we couldn't have found someone representing business also, particularly in its positive form. You have revitalized Microsoft. You are known for your modest management style, and you are particularly known for your social responsibility and taking care also of issues outside your narrow, very business interests. I could introduce, I had the opportunity to meet the Global Shapers. I was very impressed by all the stories behind. I could introduce you, but I think it's much better you introduce yourself very shortly. And if you know the motto or the purpose of the forum is improving the state of the world, and if you also say some words, how you improve the state of the world. And after the introduction, Satya will take over and the discussion, and we will hear particularly from you what you propose to the other leaders here in the room, how to improve the state of the world. Now, Basima, do you want to start? I just want to say you are coming from Iraq. Present yourself, please.
Thank you, Professor Schwab. Thanks for the forum, for this opportunity. My name is Basima Abdulrahman. I am a global shaper from Erbil, Iraq. I have started the first green building company in Iraq. And the idea of starting this initiative first dawned on me when I was back in August 2014. On the night when the terrorist group called ISIS, also known as Daesh, occupied some of the main big cities in Iraq. I still had another semester to finish my graduate degree in the States. On that night, I couldn't sleep. I feared for my family and country, and I felt ashamed and sad by the news. Then suddenly, without warning, clarity comes over me in a way that I haven't experienced before. I am overwhelmed by the lucidity I feel. I decided to go back to Iraq in this critical time to do something positive and impactful. So that's what inspires me to start KESK. Since we are going to address how my business is addressing the challenges of the Globalization 4.0, we have 12 years to limit the climate change catastrophe. And since buildings emit 1/3 of the greenhouse gas emissions, which contribute to climate change, designing them to meet sustainability features is one of the key strategies to combat this big challenge we're facing today. So, and since I'm coming from Iraq, which is a country that's been going through decades of war, sectarian conflict, and dictatorship, we are finally on the brink of a new era to rebuild our country and economy. $100 billion is the estimated budget to rebuild Iraq. So we want to make sure that the service is available on the ground to build and invest green and sustainably. So this is my mission, and this is how we're trying to address the Globalization 4.0.
Thank you, Basima. Juan David, you are coming from Colombia.
Yes. Thank you, Professor, for the invitation, and thank you, all of you, in advance, because I know for sure that at Friday afternoon, we are going to have some solutions for what is happening to the world. So thank you. I am from Colombia, from the coffee region of Colombia. And my grandparents, they have this entrepreneurial spirit. So they started a coffee business like a century ago, and they started to export. They were very, very prosperous. They create wealth for them, for their family, and for the community. But when I was 15, in our hometown, what happened was the prices of coffee were so low. They were going down, like the commodity prices were so low. So we started to see what happened when a community depends on a commodity. People were losing their jobs. People were migrating to the States, to Spain. So I started to see like what happened when you have these beautiful green hills becoming like a ghost town. So then I decided like I want to do something because we have this abundance mindset that was not working for us. We have to change to a productivity and sustainability mindset. It was not the price of coffee, the external forces were not the fault of what is happening to us. We were the ones who created that situation because we were not ready. So the last 10 years, I have been working to engage people, young people, to teach them and to equip them with the skills that they are going to need for the future. We use entertainment, we use technology, and of course, we use education. But I think all of you know that we have a learning crisis. Young people are not learning what they need. Today, each month, 10 million young people are graduating from high school. And where are the 10 jobs for those young people? So we have a problem right now in the education system because people are not learning. But here you have people with dreams, but they don't have the right skills to fulfill those dreams. So when we are talking about our situation right now, like globalization, we have to understand that we have to fix the learning system. If we don't change the education system in the world, I think we are going to have a huge humanitarian crisis and an economic crisis. People are feeling that they are getting behind, and I think we can solve that. Because I think, when we talk about machines, I think machines are fast, but humans are creative. Machines, they could tell us about the past, but as humans, I think we can build the future. And I think that's what we should discuss this week. How can we build a future where we have the learning system that works for everyone?
Thank you, Juan David. And Noura, you are the representative of the Global Chapters here from Europe. I just would like to say one word. So 6 Global Chapters are part of a community which now counts nearly 10,000 young people who want to construct a better future, organized in the World Economic Forum Global Shapers community, represented in 400 different cities in the world. But Noura, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Professor Schwab, and thank you for the invitation. My name is Noura Berrouba. I'm 24 years old. I come from Stockholm in Sweden, and I'm a global shaper. I want you for 1 second to look at the walls next to you, or any walls, and imagine all the people that are outside of these halls. The billions of people that we just saw on the screens who are facing struggles, or part of our communities. And I want you to think, these are not threats, these are not problems, these are change agents and opportunities. And if we want to create a world where we tackle our common challenges, we need to work with the people outside of these halls. I believe in the power of people, and I believe in a society where everyone is empowered to shape their own life and that of their community and society. And because of that, I'm proud to be running the European Youth Parliament, which is a youth-led, volunteer-led organization in 40 countries in Europe, where we work to give young people access, tools, information, and inspiration to take on their societies, to shape their societies, to become change agents, to be given agency. Because when I look outside of these halls, that's what I see. I don't see problems, I see opportunities. And what we do practically is we believe in active citizenship education, and we believe in civic education, and we are not doing enough to give people the tools to engage in politics, to engage in business. I also believe in friendships across borders. My region, Europe, right now we might think it's one of the most peaceful regions in the world, but historically we've been a region of hostilities and conflicts and malnourishment. So it's important to not forget where we came from. So every day we work to bring young people together across borders, Ukrainians and Russians, people from Azerbaijan and Armenia, Cypriots from both the Turkish and the Greek Cypriot side. Because we believe that young people today, they must see also people from other nations as friends. And every year, young people between the age of 16 and 25 organize 600 projects, bringing together 30,000 people, where they equip each other with these tools, where they see each other as opportunities, where they mobilize each other. And I know that politics is personal from personal experiences. I know that conflict is personal, but it needs a political solution. I know that food security is a political and a personal issue. And we need to make sure that everyone in the world realizes that they have a stake in politics and in shaping their societies. I want you to continue this mindset of seeing people as opportunities throughout the week and joining us in the European Youth Parliament and in civil society across Europe and beyond to lift people into empowerment and give them agency.
Thank you, Noura. Julia, you are coming from Chicago.
Yes. Hi, everyone. I'm Julia Luscombe. I am from the great city of Chicago, and I'm Director of Strategic Initiatives at Feeding America. We're a nonprofit working to end hunger in the United States through a nationwide network of food banks. I've gotten to spend a lot of time with this inspiring group, and it really strikes me that we share a common purpose, which is to live fulfilling lives, help others to live fulfilling lives, and to steward the planet. And growing up in the United States, it's been relatively easy for me to live a fulfilling life. I grew up in a successful, loving family that set me on a path for an excellent education and everything that comes with that. But growing up in Chicago, I also saw how that many people were being left behind. There was the time I met Maria, a second grader at a volunteer event, who told me that the lunch at school would likely be the only meal she would get to eat that day. The street I grew up on my side, had only white people, and on the other side of the street, an affordable housing complex had only black people. These were just a few of early exposures I had growing up in a big city to the deep-seated systemic inequities that I continue to see in my community, my country, and the world. I'm sure you see them too, day in and day out. And like me, you must wonder and constantly ask the question, what would I want the world to look like if I was born into different circumstances? What supports would I want to be available if my situation changed and me or someone I was close to fell on hard times? What systems and processes would I want to be in place if I, like my fellow co-chair Mohammed, was a refugee and didn't have a passport? I am committed to using my place of privilege to drive greater equity and empower others to live fulfilling lives. And I'm so fortunate I get to do that today in my work at Feeding America. We serve the 40 million people in the United States that are facing hunger. Even in the richest country in the world, 1 in 8 people and 1 in 6 children do not have the food they need to thrive. And this is despite plenty of food being available. Last year, Feeding America rescued 3.5 billion pounds of food, prevented it from going to waste, and provided it to people in need. And there's more out there. 40% of the food we produce in the United States goes to waste. We need to drive a more sustainable and equitable global architecture. That should be our priority. It's the priority of the young people we're representing here today. We need to make sure all food produced is put to good use. We need to focus on the most vulnerable populations and develop solutions targeted at them and the communities they live in. This is something I'm passionate about as well. Food insecurity in the US varies significantly by population and community. Rural communities in the US, in some cases, 1 in 3 people are food insecure. There's populations that are particularly disadvantaged. Seniors, the disabled, children. We serve 12 million children each year with solutions targeted to meet them where they are at home and at school. And this is what will drive a more equitable future. This is around the world, and it's a pressing issue, and we know that to create the more equitable future that our generation desires, we need to make sure that at a baseline, everyone needs to have the food they need to thrive. Thank you.
Thank you. Akira from Japan.
Thank you very much, Professor. So I'm Akira Sakano, and I'm quite enjoying this moment that no one has ideas where I come from. I'm based in Kamikatsu, which is a very small, tiny town in Tokushima, Japan. And it's just an example of many rural communities around the world that is having struggles that young people leave from the community to seek for better opportunities outside. And our population is only 1,500, but more than half of the population is above the age of 65. And you can count how many years we can still survive. But what is unique about our town is that we are the first municipal town or the government that declared for the ambition to be zero waste by 2020. What is zero waste? It is a policy and initiative to make no waste out of our community. How do we do that? We enrolled every resident in the community to bring their waste into one waste collection center, then segregate them into 45 different categories, which is massive. But that's really motivated not only the residents, but the local businesses to enroll into waste reduction initiatives. And we actually are 80% there for the resource recovery. And I myself is not originally from the town. I moved in from the city. And because I believe in the possibilism, I believe that showcasing by what such a small community can do, and we can all believe in what an individual or what a small group of people can achieve so much. And we are actually 80% there, but the rest of the 20%, everyone asks me that is zero waste actually possible by 2020? And I would say yes, but only if we enroll everyone on board. Because we are so interconnected in this world, and then we cannot close the loop only by our community itself. Everything comes in from the outside, and then we can't deal with the materials which is not designed to be recyclable, or not designed so that it can be recovered in the end. Then that needs systemic change in the rest of the world. And then I believe you have the power to change. And yes, thank you very much. Then that really strikes me because we all talk about the circular economy, and then we know we need to make a change, but how can we be fast enough?
Thank you, Akira. Now, introducing Mohammed, usually I mention where you are from, but I think when I say you are living now in a refugee camp, it shows already, let's say, The seriousness of your life. Can you tell us a little bit more about it?
Thank you, Professor, for inviting me to come to the World Economic Forum. It was difficult to get me here, and that speaks of the story of my life. My name is Mohammed Hassan, and I am a refugee from Kakuma refugee camp in Kenya. And I've been in that camp for more than 20 years of my life, and after Davos, I go back to that camp. And I don't live in that camp by myself. I live with 185,000 other refugees from 10 different nationalities. People hear the word refugees and they think it's only immediate problems, that people run and they need immediate shelter. But what happens to the forgotten refugees? Those of us who are in the camps for decades, those that people would rather not talk about and pretend that we don't exist. I come from that place, and I believe it's crucial we have more voices like me involved in the discussions about globalization and moving forward. People talk about ethical and sustainable development. What does that mean to me? Refugee camps are not ethical, they are not sustainable, they are not fit, and they are not conducive for human growth. People want to be ethical to robots, they want to discuss those solving death, and we don't want to focus on the human suffering. For some people, it's easier to move around. My mother, Deka Abdullahi, after my father was killed in the civil war in Somalia, tribal violence, she was in the camp. She made bread, she baked, and she sold it for 5 shillings so that me and my siblings could have a life, so that we could go to school. And she always wanted more for us. She wanted to get out of the camp. She wanted to move around. After 27 years, she died in the camp recently, about 15 months ago. And that is what keeps me up at night. Will I also die in that camp? Will my siblings, the one who's 10 years old, will he be there for the next 18 years? What happens to us? Why are people so afraid to open their doors and to let us in? We're not animals, we're not criminals. I don't think it's fair, and I shouldn't have to beg for that, you know. And where I come from in that camp, I'm a community leader. And growing up in that camp, I've had to make an active choice. I had to choose, especially after the death of my mother, about how I wanted to frame my story, about the kind of life that I wanted to lead, whether to have a victimhood mentality, to have self-pity and to feel sorry for myself, or to stand up and be counted. I decided to stand up. I am a community leader, I am a refugee advocate, and I'm also a global shaper. And I work with fellow refugees. And what we do basically is preserving hope. So we're trying to stay alive. And it's hard for some people to understand that, living in confinement and uncertainty, not knowing where you will go. It's difficult. And on a day-to-day basis, that's what I do with my fellow refugees. We have talented people who are denied access to humanity. People don't want to open the doors, and we feel unwanted, and no one really cares. So please, as you go the next couple of days, as you attend the meetings and as people discuss great, lofty ideas, think about those of us who are on the sidelines, watching in. We're not asking for much. I'm just looking for a place to call home. Thank you.
Thank you, Mohammed, and thank you also for having built inside the camp a Global Shapers community. Satya, how do you react as a business leader? We are powerful. When you listen to all those aspirations, how do you feel and what is your reaction?
Yeah, first, it's such a privilege, I would say, to be part of this panel. To listen to you and your stories and your vision for a better future for all of us, the initiative you've taken, and Mohammed's sort of capstoning of that energy, that drive, and that need is moving. And I love the line you sort of said even. It's not of, your stories are inspirational, but the question is, what are we going to do as inspired recipients of what we just heard? For me, I start, quite frankly, with, I think, a real need that all of us have as a global community to drive, in some sense, the economic growth that actually has been stalled. If I look back, to that period that a lot of people refer to between 1870 and 1940, where there was this amazing development in the world, we need to get back to even, I would say, the core challenge of economic growth. But we know we have a second, perhaps even more important challenge going forward, as exemplified by all of what was said, which is this next phase of globalization does need to deliver economic growth, but really needs to deliver it such that there's equitable growth. That's it. We have a dual challenge going forward. So what's that architecture that allows us to tackle both? On the first one, I'm very optimistic, because this fourth industrial revolution, in some sense, the core source of it is a much more malleable resource. The technology that can drive economic growth and the innovation that's needed. I don't sit here thinking that all of the innovation that is needed is here, but I'm optimistic that this malleable resource can perhaps more democratically make things more accessible. Whether it's for countries, whether it's for small businesses, large businesses, public sector, private sector, all of that. So I feel more optimistic. I also am clear-eyed about some of the big challenges. I mean, in the industry I work in digital tech, we have very big unintended consequences. Privacy, cybersecurity, ethics around the development of technology, those are all things to be tackled. Skills. We know that the jobs of the future require different skills. So how do we really equip the people, the youth of the world, for these jobs? But the real question that you all raised is, markets work, but there are limits. And the question is, in order to drive this economic growth in an equitable way, we also have to deal with the decoupling that's happening, the decoupling between economic growth and productivity growth and jobs and wages. And so this is really the challenge of our times. And I would say each of us will have to play a role. So I start even from my own responsibility. So for example, at Microsoft, one of the things that I've recognized is, instead of just talking about all the things that we do outside, starting with our own employees, their own benefits. Are we doing the right thing with parental leave, with sick leave? Now, of course, Microsoft has full-time employees and many part-time employees. Are we, in fact, doing our job to make the benefits that we provide available to even the part-time employees? Just last week, for example, we also started saying, look, people who work at Microsoft, many of them are software engineers in well-paid jobs, but we also have cafeteria workers, shuttle drivers. What about housing needs for them? The housing burden in Seattle, for example, is a place where there is actually a market failure. So we just announced support for building affordable housing so that anybody who works in our community can find housing in the community itself. So I would say for us, starting in every company, in every community that we work and live, and doing our part, and then finding this new architecture for this next phase of globalization, where we drive aggressively economic growth, but we do figure out a way to drive that equitable growth, supporting initiatives that all of you talked about. I mean, there is no reason why the world needs to have a refugee crisis, but there needs to be political will. There needs to be many other things that need to fall in place for us to resolve it. There is no reason why in Chicago we should have a challenge of food security. Yet we need the systems, a new way to tackle these challenges.
Satya, What would be your question to the young generation here, and after having listened to all the extraordinary stories? And by the way, when we were choosing among who should represent the Global Shapers, I have to say we had so many examples, like the people sitting here around. What is your question to those here?
You know, just even sitting here listening to you, I was thinking, you know, how did that inspiration come? How did you take action? But really, the thing that I would say I'm most curious to hear from you is what advice would you have for leaders like me, for leaders like Professor Schwab, and the leaders in this room? What should we do to architect this next phase of globalization, so that the initiatives, the vision you have for a better future is going to be fulfilled? Maybe you can start, Mohammed.
In my context, as coming from a refugee camp and growing up in that camp, I'd like people to think about the fact that money, capital, and goods move around the world very easily, and yet people can't move in decades. So how do we go away from keeping people in camps where we have the idea is fostered on dependency on aid, and you just have a sack and you're waiting for food at the end of the month, and that's not sustainable? How do we go from that to making people self-reliant, to giving them skills and marketable skills and higher education so that they can make a life for themselves? And I think the private sector, it's not only government responsibilities, but I also think that the government can look at the camps. Like the place I come from, 185,000 refugees. We finish high school, and then what do? We're just sitting idling in the camps. And I think we're human beings, and we have the potential, the capacity to do more, and we'd love to do more if we're given access. So it basically comes down to access. It's access and equal opportunity, access to higher education, marketable skills, and also provide like legal pathways for durable solutions, you know? Make things easier, make it easier for me to move, to travel, so that maybe someday, hopefully, I can come back to Davos once again. So that's yeah. So for me, the private sector, in hand with global leaders and governments, they can step up and also address the issues that are happening back in our countries of origin. Like I come from Somalia originally, so make it safe and make it peaceful for me to be able to one day go back to my country, but also so that give me the tools I need to make a life for myself in the camp and make it easier for me to access opportunities out of the camp. That's my idea. Yeah, I would say.
Yeah, go ahead.
Continue. So for me, every global leaders needs to be localized. Because the Globalization 4.0, I would say, it needs to start from localization. Because that's where you see what is happening. And then that's where you can see the first step moving forward, how you can support. And then I would say, work with us. I mean, we are I believe, most uncomfortable people that you will be working with. Then that's where you can really start making dialogues, making action, and then we can find the mutual steps forward. And that's how we can actually make a change. That's all I can say.
Great. Julia?
So my advice would be to go all in understanding the needs of the communities where you operate, where your consumers are, and work with your teams to find new innovative ways to address those needs. Coming from a nonprofit organization, I can also speak to the fact that the social sector is working towards ambitious goals with limited resources. And for all the work that we want to do in our communities and around the world, no one can do it alone. So we can't think about this as a set of isolated initiatives. We need to really think about a movement, an organized effort that brings together strong commitments from the social sector, the public sector, and the private sector to work on these issues. For food security in particular, and Professor Schwab, as you mentioned, this is just one of the many intersecting issues. Food security is foundational to building that equitable future. It intersects with climate change, job creation, et cetera. And there's so many opportunities from the private sector to lean into this work, really optimizing how we use data and technology to match the supply and demand of food increase access points and measure our impact, finding new ways to include people facing hunger and different constituents in designing these solutions. And then I think importantly too, to really drive this systemic change and understand and attack the kind of root causes of food insecurity, we need to get comfortable with long-term investments in systemic change, which I know may be different from how we operate, kind of looking towards that annual report. So really getting comfortable making those long-term investments and telling that narrative would be my advice too.
I have two advice. The first one is it's time to be uncomfortable and bold. Let's not fool ourselves. In front of me is so much power, whether it's political power, financial power, influence, or something else. So when we talk about issues this week, we can't just talk about them as issues that we could solve, because we are the ones that should solve those issues. And people outside of Davos are expecting results. The real success is not measured by the amount of meetings, it's measured by the real impact for people on the ground. Let's leave the ego behind. Let's leave short-termism behind. Let's be bold, attentive, and ambitious. And the second thing, connecting to this theme, is in building a new global architecture, we also need to look at the current global architecture. And to me, it is very frustrating seeing how we're going to solve all of these issues when we're seeing the dissolution of the very institutions and ideals that are supposed to tackle these issues. Corruption, countries moving away from multilateralism in a time of increasing global challenges, increasing inequalities, the demise and backsliding of democracies. We're seeing both that the quality and quantity of democracies in the world, they're decreasing. We need to address those system changes if we want to address those issues. We can't fix the problems if we don't have a system in which to solve those issues. So I hope you take this as a challenge for this week to prove to people outside of these halls that you take these issues seriously.
Satya, so I think all of us, we want to thrive, we want to be better tomorrow. And I don't think that I have an advice. Maybe I think, like all as a global society, as leaders, we have to learn new skills. So the first one is like we have to change the questions that we are making in the rooms. When I was coming, I was with a senior guy, and I was telling him about education, and he said, "Really, can you change education?" And I said, that is not the question that you should be asking me. The question that we should be answering is, how are we going to change education? So we have to shift from can we do it to how can we do it? That is the first thing that we have to have, like that skill, new questions. Second, I think we have to listen more. What happened in Colombia with the peace referendum, what happened in Brexit, what happened in the United States, all that happened because we were not listening. And what is happening in education is we are not listening. We are not listening what young people are thinking. So we have to listen more. And the third one, I think, is about energy. And what I mean by energy, all of you have a mood, have an energy that can change a room. So how do we inspire ourselves to the greatness when we don't have nothing less? And I think it's inspiration. So sometimes we feel this paralysis analysis, but there are a lot of young people, social entrepreneurs, companies, who are doing a great job. So we have to share those views. And this is also for the media leaders. We have to show the good things that are happening around the world too. So I will say that those are the three skills that we should be learning.
I will try to be very short. While we're trying to find and design solutions for Globalization 4.0, let's think collectively and let's be wide in our thinking. Let's think human, animals, plants. Think beyond your personal benefits, your families, your race, your region. To urban developers, I would say, let's think of making buildings, let's work on making buildings produce rather than consume. Only in this world we will be able to prosper. So imagine with me a world where buildings are decentralized clean energy generators, food producers, rainwater harvesters, and biodiversity conservers. This is the world that we want to be living in. And this inspired us to start an initiative that re-envisioned existing buildings in my city to help inform the government decision in the rebuilding of Iraq.
Satya, we are coming to the end of this opening session. How would you summarize the message going out from this panel?
I think what I take away is the core need for innovation. And when I say innovation, I use it in the broadest sense. It's not just about any one technology. It is about really innovation and its impact in our broadest society. And that's ultimately going to come back to, I think, what all of you said is the advice to us all as leaders and as participants, which is how are we going to take what is innovation in our hands and really take action so that we can drive the outcomes that we all desire as a global community. So that's, I think, what we need to really take away, which is this is the time to act with ingenuity that you all have shown. In a constrained environment, you have shown us that you can make progress. So instead of sitting and saying, let's accept status quo, let us all take the inspiration that you have given us and really challenge the status quo with innovation and ingenuity.
I would like to thank not only the panel, but all the global shapers, because I know our global shaper communities at the moment drive over 1,000 projects all over the world. It's just remarkable. I would also encourage you to engage, because during the meeting, I know there are many temptations, there are many opportunities offered, but there are, as I mentioned, around 200 sessions which are really output-oriented. We may not bring the, let's say, the solution to the big questions, Brexit or whatever it is, but I think it's important that during this week we make very small but very important steps towards the future. And those steps have to be, and that's the essence of the World Economic Forum, have to be carried by a stakeholder approach, which means by a collaboration between business, governments, and I should add, the wonderful young generation. Thank you very much for having participated at this opening session. I wish you a very good annual meeting 2019.